Hi, this is Eliza Inkberry with Darkside University's Gothic Gardening class. This is week 4's video on contrast in the landscape, and this one's really going to touch on everything that we've covered so far, plus a few of the ones that we haven't covered yet as far as the design principles: line, light, pattern, texture, color, variety, scale. Everything is going to be something that you could use to create contrast with, because you're basically defining one element by juxtaposing it with another so that it stands out. So you can read up on that if you want, but I think most of us kind of understand contrast. Here's an example of it with color, and in this one they're using a dark plant that might be a barberry. I'm not really sure. And you can look at landscaping centers will have, or nurseries will have, a lot of different evergreen plants. These are probably a conifer of some sort. It's kind of hard to see in this photograph, but you could definitely juxtapose this color with just the silver, or maybe a plant that flowers white for most of the year, or something else. Any kind of color contrast counts as contrast. And what you're basically trying to do is keep the eye from being bored. You don't want everything to be too uniform across your landscape or your garden, because then people just glance at it the same way they would a lawn, where it's all the same thing, so one quick glance and you're done and you've taken in that information. But if there's a lot of different elements there, then people look longer and it's more enjoyable. It's more of a mystery to kind of figure out what you're looking at. Here's another color example. You've got blue and yellow. I think that's Brodea. Is the blue, and probably the yellow flowers are a sedum or a spurge, which is a euphorbia. Sedums are not euphorbias, but that's two different things it could be. And then they've got a spiky plant here that I can't quite see. It could be a crocosmia, or I can't quite tell, but that adds some contrast. Here you've got blue agaves in a yellow grass that might be a carex type grass. And then they've added some extra contrast with just this colored wall here, and then the darker colored tree behind it, and the silver tree here. This is a cool colors garden, and they've added warm hardscaping as a contrast to the cool colors used in the garden. And here there's not quite as much contrast, but they've got kind of a structure here, and then these posts add some contrast, and this dark trunk tree does as well. So this is a more simple version that a lot of us might have an easier time achieving, depending on how much time you have to garden. This one is really cool. This is the garden shed that they built. You can see there's kind of a Gothic arch back here, but it's got that peeling paint look, and a very tidy little garden around it, but it has a nice contrast to both the building behind it and the softer landscape plants around it. It definitely stands out. Here's another landscape element. I think this one may have just a little bit too much contrast going on. I'd like to see more of a garden around it. But this is a little Gothic gazebo that has a lot of contrast. When you're looking at that lawn, you definitely notice this right away. And this is a house that looks like it's built out of cobs, so I think that somebody kind of went off on their own here to create their own house design and made kind of a crazy witch house. And it has a nice, just the house itself is a huge contrast, probably to every house on the block, but definitely it matches its garden, but it also is a contrast to it. And here's an example again of a structure being a nice contrast, and then the water is a contrast to the lawn here. I think that lawn, I never like to see lawn going right up to a water's edge. It's always nice when there's an additional filtering set of plants that are right along the water's edge to kind of filter the water as it runs off into the stream or whatever that is. But it isn't a huge contrast there, and then this is a very manicured area that's a contrast to the rest of what's in the picture. And here, this is huge amount of contrast with the dark reds and the whites, and then the very geometric patterns and the silhouettes, and the form and texture, the variety. It definitely has a lot of contrast going on, and it really kind of works for it. Again, this is a lot of hardscaping used as contrast to the plants, and everything kind of matches. If you look at the coloring on the rocks here, you can tell that it kind of matches the plants in the background as far as the color tones that are used, but it still has a pretty strong contrast with like the black chairs they're standing out and the stone, and this looks like it's a water feature over here in the potted plants, so it definitely has things that catch the eye. This is some pretty obvious contrast. That's definitely a noticeable thing coming out of the lawn there. It's definitely not lawn, and I'm sure it contrasts again with every house in the neighborhood. It looks like something that you'd have to have an artist make for you. I doubt that these are sold mass market, but you might be able to find some sort of old statuary that's been kind of breaking apart and find that it works really well as a contrast and a focal point somewhere in your garden. And this is a kind of small image, but this is a claw-footed tub that someone's used to put vines spilling out of. And this looks like English ivy, but I can think of a lot of other vines that you could do that with. And here's a bench. I kept looking at this trying to decide if it's wood or stone. Pretty sure it's wood, and I'm not sure I would sit on that, but it's a really neat sculptural quality and contrasts nicely with the landscape. And here you have planters that both contrast in shape to each other, and then they really stand out from the landscape at large, and from the very structural plants. It looks like different kinds of bulbs that this person has planted in them. I like this a lot because you could use a lot of different things to make a pattern like this in the garden, and then you can plant different plants in there, and it ends up having kind of a stained glass effect, which is a big focal point and different from the more chaotic and loose structure of the garden behind it. This kind of has a haunted feel to it. I liked this because they've just left a snag, which is a dead tree. They're really good for wildlife. A lot of things like woodpeckers and owls and bats and a lot of different things will house in snags. And since humans are so good at taking snags down because we think that they're unsightly in the landscape, then these animals are displaced and don't have as many places to make homes like they would in an undisturbed forest area. So it's kind of an interesting decision to leave that there, I guess, since they don't have a house nearby to worry about it falling on. And it has a nice contrast to all the lush greenery that is down around it. And this is a pretty easy way to have contrast, and the trees just do it for you. It's just their form and their roots. They probably prefer not to have their roots eroded like this, but when it happens it is really beautiful, and humans can't help but love looking at it. So that's another example. You might choose some plants that you know are going to have some good structural contrast qualities to their trunks, or maybe very dark bark or very pale bark. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And if you have any more questions about contrast, let me know in the discussion forums or in the chats.